I want to tell you about the year I lost everything while my sister watched and smiled. Not the kind of smile you give someone when you're happy for them, or even the awkward smile people put on when they don't know what else to do. The smile that says they've been waiting for this. The smile that says they think you finally got what you deserved. It started with my father's stroke. He was 71, still vital, still the kind of man who woke up at 5:30 every morning to read the paper with his coffee. I got the call at work on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother's voice was high and thin, stretched tight with panic. I left my desk without shutting down my computer, drove to the hospital with my hands locked on the steering wheel, and arrived to find my sister Vanessa already there in the waiting room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I came in. "Took you long enough." I had driven across the city in 32 minutes during rush hour. Vanessa lived 6 blocks from the hospital. My father survived. The right side of his body was weakened, his speech slightly slurred, but the doctors said he would recover most of his function with therapy. My mother called it a miracle. I called it a new chapter, one where everything shifted in ways I didn't recognize until it was too late. I had always been the responsible one. Not in a way people say it is a compliment, but in the way that means you're the one people call when something needs to be handled. I was 34, worked as a senior compliance officer at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, owned a small house in a decent neighborhood, paid my bills on time, and visited my parents every Sunday for dinner. Vanessa was 31, worked in marketing for a series of startups that never quite took off, rented an apartment she complained about constantly, and showed up to family events when it was convenient. But Vanessa was funny. Vanessa was charming. Vanessa knew how to make our father laugh, how to lean into him during movies and say things that made him shake his head and grin. I had spent my whole life watching that dynamic and telling myself it didn't matter. I was the one they relied on. That counted for something. After the stroke, my mother asked if I could help more. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and my father needed someone to drive him to physical therapy 3 times a week. Vanessa worked from home most days, but my mother didn't ask her. She asked me. I rearranged my schedule, started leaving work early on Tuesdays and Thursdays, used my lunch hour on Fridays. My manager was understanding at first. Less so when it stretched into the 2nd month. I sat with my father in beige waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. I watched him struggle to grip a rubber ball, watched his frustration build when his hand wouldn't cooperate, watched the therapist speak to him in the kind of gentle, patient voice usually reserved for children. On the drive home, he would stare out the window and not speak. I tried to fill the silence with updates about my work, about the garden I was planning for spring, about anything that felt normal. He would nod occasionally. I don't know if he was listening. Vanessa visited on weekends. She brought pastries from the expensive bakery downtown, kissed our mother on the cheek, and sat with our father while they watched sports or old westerns. She made him laugh. She was good at that. When she left, my mother would sigh and say how nice it was to have her there, how much it lifted his spirits. I would be loading the dishwasher or folding laundry, updating the medication chart I had made to help keep track of his prescriptions. 3 months after the stroke, my father asked me to help him with some paperwork. He had always managed the family finances, everything organized in labeled folders in the oak filing cabinet in his study. Now he needed help understanding some of the statements, processing what needed to be paid, what needed to be filed. I sat with him at the desk where I had done homework as a teenager, and we went through everything methodically. Bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, the mortgage that had been paid off years ago, property tax records, utility bills. It was during one of these sessions that he mentioned the business. I didn't know he still had a stake in it. He had retired 8 years earlier from the commercial printing company he had co-founded with 2 partners in his 30s. I assumed he had sold his shares. He hadn't. He still owned 33%, and the company was doing well. Very well. The quarterly dividend checks were substantial. "I want to make sure your mother is taken care of," he said. His speech was clear now, but still effortful. "If something happens to me, nothing is going to happen," I said automatically. He looked at me with the expression I had seen on his face 1,000 times, the one that said he was being practical and I was being emotional. "I need to update some things, make sure the estate plan is current." I drove into his attorney's office the following week. Vanessa was supposed to come. My father had asked her specifically to be there, but she texted an hour before saying she had a work emergency. We sat in the conference room without her while the attorney, a thin man in his 60s named George, walked us through the existing documents. Everything was split evenly between Vanessa and me. The house, the investments, the business shares. My father had been meticulous about fairness. "Do you want to make any changes?" George asked. My father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "No, it's fine as it is." I didn't think anything of it at the time. My father's recovery plateaued around the 6-month mark. He could walk with a cane, could dress himself, could speak clearly enough to be understood. But he was tired in a way that seemed permanent, like the stroke had taken something essential and left behind a weariness that settled into his bones. He stopped reading the morning paper. He watched more television. He asked fewer questions. My mother tried to stay cheerful, but I could see the worry in the way she watched him, the way she hovered. I was still driving him to appointments, still managing the paperwork, still coming over twice a week to help with whatever needed to be done. My own life had narrowed to a routine of work, my parents' house, and brief weekends where I tried to catch up on everything I had been neglecting. I had stopped dating. I had stopped going to the yoga classes I used to enjoy. I had stopped calling friends who eventually stopped calling back. Vanessa got engaged in October. His name was Derek, he worked in finance, and they had been dating for 8 months. She brought him to Sunday dinner and he was polite, good-looking, the kind of man who knew how to make small talk and ask the right questions. My father seemed pleased. My mother started talking about wedding plans immediately. I was happy for Vanessa. I was. But there was something about watching her show off her ring, watching our mother fuss over her, watching our father smile more broadly than he had in months, that made me feel like I was standing outside a window looking in at a warm room where I didn't quite belong. The wedding was planned for June. 8 months away. Vanessa called me 3 weeks after the engagement to ask if I would be her maid of honor. I said yes, of course, and she talked for 20 minutes about the venue they had booked, the color scheme she was considering, the photographer she was trying to hire. I made the appropriate sounds of enthusiasm and tried not to think about how I would fit dress fittings and bridal showers into a schedule that was already stretched thin. In December, my father had another stroke. A small one, the doctor said, but it was the second one, and that changed things. He came home after 4 days in the hospital, weaker, more confused, needing more help with basic tasks. My mother couldn't manage alone. We needed to hire someone to come during the day, a home health aide who could help with bathing, dressing, meals. It was expensive. My mother had always been careful with money, but this was different. This was ongoing, open-ended, the kind of expense that could deplete savings quickly. I offered to help cover the cost. My mother cried and said no, they could manage, they had savings for this kind of thing. I insisted. We compromised on splitting the cost of the aid 3 ways, my mother from their savings, and Vanessa and I contributing monthly. It was $800 a month for each of us. I rearranged my budget. Vanessa said yes immediately, said of course, whatever was needed. She paid the first month. Then she didn't pay the second. When I asked her about it, she apologized, said things were tight with wedding expenses, she would catch up next month. She didn't. By March, she was 3 months behind and I was covering her portion because my mother couldn't afford the full cost alone. I didn't say anything to my parents. I didn't want to add stress. I told myself Vanessa would pay me back once the wedding was over, once things settled. I told myself a lot of things that made it easier to keep going. The wedding was beautiful. Vanessa was radiant in a dress that cost more than my car payment, and Derek looked at her like she was the only person in the room. I stood next to her at the altar in a bridesmaid dress I had paid for myself, held her bouquet during the vows, and smiled in all the photos. My father attended in a wheelchair. He looked small and tired, but he was there, and Vanessa cried when Derek wheeled him onto the dance floor for the father-daughter dance. Everyone said it was touching. It was. I danced once with an old friend of Derek's who was polite and asked about my work. I left early before the cake cutting and no one seemed to notice. 2 weeks after the wedding, my father fell. He had been trying to get to the bathroom alone, didn't want to wake my mother, and he fell. Fractured his hip. Surgery, hospital stay, rehab facility. The home health aid was no longer sufficient. We needed full-time care, or we needed to consider a nursing facility. My mother was devastated. She couldn't imagine moving him to a facility, couldn't imagine giving up the house they had lived in for 40 years. I sat with her at the kitchen table and went through the finances. The savings were depleting faster than expected. The cost of the rehab facility was substantial, and if he came home, we would need round-the-clock care that insurance didn't fully cover. The business dividend checks helped, but they weren't enough. We talked about selling the house. My mother cried. I told her we would figure it out. Vanessa was on her honeymoon in Italy. She sent photos of vineyards and coastal villages and elaborate meals. She called once, said she was so sorry to hear about Dad, said we should do whatever we thought was best. She didn't offer to come home early. She didn't offer to help. My father never fully recovered from the fall. He was transferred to a long-term care facility in August, a place that smelled like boiled vegetables and floor cleaner, where the television in the common room was always too loud and the staff called him sweetie in voices that were kind but impersonal. My mother visited every day. I visited after work 3 or 4 times a week. Vanessa visited on Sundays sometimes. The facility cost $9,000 a month. Insurance covered some of it. The rest came from my parents' savings, which were draining steadily. I increased my monthly contribution to $2,000. I stopped contributing to my retirement account. I stopped eating out. I bought generic brands and skipped vacations and told myself it was temporary. Vanessa paid sporadically. Sometimes she would send a check, sometimes she would Venmo half of what she owed, sometimes she would apologize and promise to catch up. By November, she owed me over $15,000. When I tried to talk to her about it, she got defensive. Said she and Derek were trying to save for a down payment on a house, said I didn't understand how expensive everything was, said she was doing her best. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that I was eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week and hadn't bought new clothes in over a year and was having panic attacks about whether I could afford to fix my car if something went wrong. I didn't. I said it was fine, we'd figure it out. My father died on a Tuesday in February, 2 years and 4 months after his first stroke. He died quietly, in his sleep, which everyone said was a blessing. My mother called me at 6 in the morning. I drove to the facility and sat with her next to his bed, holding her hand while we waited for the funeral home to arrive. Vanessa got there an hour later, her eyes red, and she hugged my mother and cried, and everyone said how awful it was, how heartbreaking, how at least he wasn't suffering anymore. The funeral was on Saturday. A lot of people came. Old friends, former colleagues, business associates, neighbors. They told stories about my father that made him sound funny and generous and larger than life. I stood next to my mother and shook hands and accepted condolences and felt like I was watching everything from very far away. After the service, after the reception at the house, after the last guests had left, I sat with my mother and Vanessa in the living room and we talked about what came next. My mother was exhausted, hollowed out, moving through the world like she was underwater. She wanted to sell the house, she said. It was too big, too full of memories, too much to manage alone. She would move into a smaller place, something easier, something that didn't echo. What about the estate? Vanessa asked. I looked at her. We'll deal with that when we need to. I just want to know what to expect, she said. Derek and I are trying to plan. We want to buy a house. My mother looked at her, then at me, and something passed across her face that I couldn't read. Your father left everything organized. George will walk us through it. We met with George 2 weeks later. 3 of us sat in the same conference room where my father and I had sat 2 years earlier. George was kind, efficient, and he walked us through the will. Everything was as I remembered. The estate was split evenly between Vanessa and me. The house, the investments, the business shares. The business shares were worth more than I had expected. Significantly more. The company had been acquired by a larger corporation 6 months earlier, and my father's shares had been converted to a cash payout that would be distributed to the estate. It was substantial. It was life-changing. Split evenly, Vanessa and I would each receive enough to buy a house outright to pay off debts to breathe. Vanessa was smiling. When do we get it? George looked at her, then at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach tighten. There's one complication, he said slowly. About a year ago, your father came to see me. He wanted to make some changes. My mother was very still. What kind of changes? He wanted to add a provision, George said. Regarding the business share specifically, I felt cold. What provision? George pulled out a document, several pages clipped together. He wanted the business proceeds divided based on contribution to his care during his final illness. He was very specific. He said that one of you had taken on the primary responsibility for his care, both practically and financially, and he wanted that acknowledged. Vanessa's smile was gone. What does that mean? It means the business proceeds are not split evenly, George said. He looked at me. They go entirely to your sister. The room was silent. I couldn't breathe. I stared at George, then at the document he was sliding across the table to me, then at my mother, who was crying quietly, her hand pressed to her mouth. Vanessa stood up. That's not fair. That's not what he said. He said everything was split evenly. The house and the other investments are still split evenly, George said calmly. This provision applies only to the business proceeds. How much? Vanessa's voice was shaking. $1.2 million, George said. Vanessa turned to my mother. Did you know about this? My mother shook her head. He didn't tell me. He just said he was updating some paperwork. This is insane, Vanessa said. She was pacing now, her hands clenched. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. He was very clear, George said. I asked him multiple times if he was certain. He said he wanted to make sure the person who had sacrificed the most was taken care of. His words. I couldn't speak. I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body, like this was happening to someone else. I thought about the drives to physical therapy, the medication charts, the folders of paperwork, the nights I had stayed late to sit with my father while my mother rested, the money I had poured into his care while my own savings evaporated. I thought about Vanessa's engagement photos and her honeymoon pictures and her excuses about why she couldn't contribute. This isn't right, Vanessa said. She was looking at me now, her face flushed. This isn't fair. You can split it with me. You don't need all of it. I found my voice. I covered your share of his care costs for over a year. You owe me more than $15,000. I was going to pay you back when? The word came out harder than I intended. When were you going to pay me back, Vanessa? I was dealing with my own life, she said. I was getting married. I was trying to build a future. So was I said quietly. I just put mine on hold to take care of Dad. She stared at me. Then she turned to my mother. Are you going to let her do this, or are you just going to sit there? My mother looked up at her with an expression I had never seen before. Tired, but something else too. Something that might have been disappointment. Your father made his decision, she said. He had his reasons. Vanessa grabbed her purse and walked out. The door slammed behind her. I sat there with my mother and George, a document still on the table between us, and I felt nothing. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where something should have been. The next 3 months were among the strangest of my life. I went through the motions of settling the estate, signing documents, attending meetings with accountants and attorneys. The house sold quickly. My mother moved into a small condo near her sister, a bright, manageable space with a balcony where she could grow herbs and tomatoes. She seemed lighter somehow, unburdened by the weight of the house and its memories. Vanessa stopped speaking to me. She didn't return my calls. She sent my mother long, angry texts about how unfair it all was, how I had manipulated Dad, how I was selfish and vindictive. My mother stopped responding after the first few. She told me privately that she was tired, that she didn't have the energy to mediate, that Vanessa would come around eventually. I wasn't sure I wanted her to. The money arrived in my account on a Wednesday in May. $1.2 million. I looked at the balance on my phone screen and felt a sensation I couldn't name. Not joy. Not relief. Something more complicated, something that sat in my chest like a stone. I paid off my mortgage first. Then my car. Then the credit card debt I had accumulated covering my father's care costs. I put money into my retirement account, money into savings, money into an investment account a financial advisor helped me set up. I quit my job, the one that had become increasingly untenable as I had tried to balance work with caregiving, and took 2 months off to figure out what I wanted to do next. I slept. I read books. I sat in my garden and watched birds and tried to remember what it felt like to have space in my life for something other than obligation. In July, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. When I did, a woman's voice asked if I was my father's daughter. I said yes. She identified herself as Karen, the office manager at my father's former printing company. I wanted to reach out personally, she said. I don't know if you knew this, but your father put something aside for you years ago. He was very specific about when you should receive it. I don't understand, I said. He left an envelope with me, Karen said. He said to give it to you 6 months after he passed. He was very clear that you should have it then, not before. I have it here if you'd like to come by and pick it up. I drove to the company's office the next day. It was in an industrial complex south of the city, a low building with a loading dock and the smell of paper and ink. Karen met me in the lobby, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She handed me a large manila envelope with my name written on it in my father's handwriting. I thanked her and sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the envelope. My hands were shaking. I opened it carefully. Inside were several documents. The first was a letter, 2 pages handwritten. It started, "My dear daughter, I want to be very clear about something," he wrote. The decisions I made about the estate were not made lightly, and they were not made because I loved you more than your sister. I love you both. But love and fairness are not always the same thing. For the last 2 years of my life, you showed up. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. You rearranged your life to take care of me and your mother. You sacrificed your time, your money, your energy, your future. You did this without being asked, without complaint, without expecting recognition or reward. You did it because you are the kind of person who takes care of the people she loves, even when it costs you everything. Your sister is not that person. I don't say this with anger or disappointment. It is simply true. She has other qualities, other strengths, but caregiving is not one of them. I made the mistake for many years of pretending this difference didn't exist, of treating you both the same even when your contributions were not the same. I realize now that this was not fair to you. The business proceeds are yours because you earned them. Not through inheritance, but through the work you did, the sacrifices you made, the life you put on hold to care for me. I wanted to use that money to build the life you deserve. The life you should have been building all along if you hadn't been taking care of everyone else. I also want you to know that I kept records. When I met with George to update the will, I brought documentation. Every appointment you drove me to, every bill you paid, every time you showed up when your sister didn't. George has copies if you ever need them. I did this because I know you're a sister, and I know she will not accept this decision quietly. I wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity, no room for her to claim I was confused or coerced. You were the child I relied on, and I took that for granted for too long. I am sorry for that. I am sorry I didn't tell you more often how much it meant, how much you meant. I am sorry I let your sister take you for granted too. Please do not feel guilty for accepting what I have left you. You have earned it in ways that go far beyond money. And please do not let your sister make you feel otherwise. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. I just wish I had said it more. I sat in that parking lot and cried harder than I had cried at his funeral, harder than I had cried through any of the last 2 years. I cried for the father who had seen me, who had understood, who had tried in his final year to correct an imbalance that had existed my entire life. I cried for the version of myself who had kept showing up, who had kept giving, who had nearly disappeared under the weight of it all. The other documents in the envelope were what my father had mentioned. Records. A spreadsheet he had made, listing every appointment I had driven him to, every visit I had made, every hour I had spent managing his care. Receipts and bank statements showing the money I had contributed, the money Vanessa had promised and never delivered. A timeline of his illness, annotated with notes about who had been there and who hadn't. It was meticulous. It was irrefutable. It was my father's final act of protection, making sure that if this decision was ever challenged, the truth would be documented and clear. I took the documents home and put them in a safe deposit box. I didn't think I would need them. I was wrong. In September, I received a letter from an attorney I didn't know. It was on behalf of Vanessa and Derek. They were contesting the will. They claimed my father had been unduly influenced, that he hadn't been mentally competent to make changes to his estate, that I had manipulated him for financial gain. They were demanding the business proceeds be split evenly as originally intended, and they were prepared to pursue litigation. I read the letter 3 times. Then I called George. I was expecting this, he said when I explained. I'm sorry, I know this is the last thing you need. What do? You let me handle it, he said. And you don't engage with them directly. Everything goes through me. The legal process was slow and exhausting. Depositions, document requests, interrogatories. Vanessa and Derek's attorney was aggressive, framing me as a manipulative opportunist who had isolated my father and poisoned him against his other daughter. They painted a picture of me as someone who had swooped in during his illness, taken control, and systematically cut Vanessa out. George responded with documentation. The records my father had kept. Testimony from the home health aide who confirmed that I had been the primary family presence throughout my father's illness. Testimony from the staff at the care facility who said the same. Bank records showing my financial contributions. Phone records showing the frequency of my calls and visits compared to Vanessa's. The attorney tried to argue that my father's mental state had been compromised, that the stroke had affected his judgment. George brought in medical records and testimony from my father's physicians, all confirming that his cognitive function had remained intact, that he had been fully capable of making decisions about his estate. I sat through a deposition where Vanessa's attorney asked me questions designed to make me sound calculating and cruel. Had I kept track of my visits specifically to use them as leverage later? Had I deliberately not told my father about Vanessa's financial contributions? Had I pressured him to change his will? I answered every question calmly. No. 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 I had kept track of visits because I was managing his care and needed to coordinate schedules. I had not told my father about Vanessa's missing payments because I hadn't wanted to stress him. I had not known he was changing his will until after he died. But you benefited from those changes, the attorney said. Yes, I said. I did, and you don't think that's suspicious? I looked at him. I think my father made a decision based on what he observed over 2 years. I think he saw who showed up and who didn't. I think he acted accordingly. The case went to mediation in December, nearly a year after my father's death. We sat in a conference room, me and George on one side, Vanessa and Derek and their attorney on the other. Vanessa wouldn't look at me. Derek looked angry and uncomfortable. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with grey hair and sharp eyes, went through the facts methodically. The will was valid. The documentation was clear. My father's mental competency was not in question. The decision to allocate the business proceeds to me was based on demonstrable differences in contribution to his care, both financial and otherwise. There was no evidence of undue influence, coercion, or manipulation. What I see here, the mediator said, is a father who made a deliberate choice to recognize a child who had sacrificed significantly to care for him. That is not unusual, that is not improper, and frankly, it is well within his rights. Vanessa's attorney tried to argue that the division was still unfair, that Vanessa had been shut out unfairly. The mediator cut him off. Your client received half of the house proceeds and half of all other investments. That is substantial. The business proceeds were allocated differently because they represented a specific recognition of caregiving. If your client wanted to be recognized for caregiving, she should have participated in caregiving. The room was silent. Then Vanessa stood up. She was always Dad's favorite. That's what this is really about. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the sister I had grown up with, who I had protected and defended and made excuses for my entire life. I saw the sister who had laughed while I had struggled, who had lived her life while mine had contracted to the size of hospital, waiting rooms and nursing facilities and stacks of bills I couldn't pay. I saw the sister who had come to me now, a year after our father's death, not to grieve or reconcile, but to take. No, I said quietly. This is about showing up. She left. Derek followed her. Their attorney made some noises about potentially pursuing litigation anyway, but George cut him off with a reminder that if they did, we would countersue for legal fees, and given the strength of our documentation, we would win. The attorney left. The mediator closed her notebook and told me she was sorry, that family disputes were always difficult, but that I should feel confident I had done nothing wrong. I sat in that conference room after everyone else had gone and felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Not vindication. Just a quiet, solid certainty that I had done what I needed to do, that my father had seen me clearly, and that I didn't need Vanessa's approval or forgiveness to move forward. The case was formally dropped in January. Vanessa and Derek withdrew their challenge. George sent me the official documentation. It was over. I didn't hear from Vanessa after that. No call, no text, no letter. My mother said Vanessa had told her she needed space, though she couldn't be around me right now, that maybe someday it could all work things out, but not yet. My mother sounded tired when she said it, resigned in a way that made me sad for her. But she also said she understood, that she had watched everything unfold, that she knew I had done nothing wrong. Your father knew what he was doing, she said. He wanted to take care of you, let him. I started a new job in February as a consultant for pharmaceutical compliance, working remotely with flexible hours and good pay. I traveled when I wanted to, took long weekends, met friends I hadn't seen in years. I started dating someone I met at a bookstore, someone kind and funny who didn't need anything from me except my company. I bought a new car. I renovated my kitchen. I planted a garden that I actually had time to tend. I thought about my father often. I thought about his letter, his documentation, his careful planning to make sure I was protected even after he was gone. I thought about what he had written, that love and fairness were not always the same thing, that I had earned what he left me, that I should not feel guilty. Some days I didn't feel guilty. Some days I did. Some days I felt angry at Vanessa, angry at the entire situation, angry at the years I had spent trying to be enough for everyone. Some days I felt sad for the relationship we would probably never have, for the sister I had lost, for the family dinners that would never happen again. But mostly I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt free. Not because of the money, though the money helped. Not because I had won some battle, though I had defended myself successfully. I felt free because I had finally stopped carrying the weight of other people's expectations, other people's needs, other people's versions of who I was supposed to be. I was the daughter who had shown up. I was the daughter who had sacrificed. I was the daughter who had been seen, in the end, by the person who mattered most. And I was the daughter who had learned, finally, that it was okay to stop giving pieces of myself away to people who had never valued them in the first place. I still think about the day I sat in that parking lot reading my father's letter. I think about how he called me my dear daughter and how that phrase had made me cry because it was so simple and so complete. I think about how he had known I would need that documentation, that proof, that validation. I think about how he had spent his final year quietly building a case for my worth because he knew no one else would. And I think about Vanessa's smile when I arrived at the hospital the day of his first stroke. The smile that said I took too long, the smile that suggested I wasn't quite measuring up even then. I think about how the smile changed over the next 2 years, how it shifted from superiority to indifference to confusion to anger when she realized the story wasn't unfolding the way she expected. I think about her face in that mediation room when a mediator said that if she had wanted recognition for caregiving, she should have participated in caregiving. I think about how she stood up and said I was always a favorite, as if that explained everything, as if love was a fixed resource that her father had rationed unfairly. I don't think I was the favorite. I think I was the one who made it possible for him to need one less thing in a life that had become overwhelmingly full of needs. I think he appreciated that in ways he didn't know how to express until it was almost too late. I think he tried to say thank you the only way he had left. I visit my mother twice a month now. We have lunch, or we go to a museum, or we sit on her balcony and talk about books and plants and the small, manageable details of our separate lives. She doesn't mention Vanessa unless I ask. When I do, she says Vanessa is fine, she and Derek bought a house, they're settling in. Maybe someday we'll all have dinner together, but she's not pushing it. I don't ask often. I've made peace with the idea that some relationships end not with a dramatic explosion, but with a slow, quiet dissolution, with distance and silence and the recognition that you are not responsible for fixing something that was never whole to begin with. I've also made peace with the money. I used to feel strange about it, guilty in a way I couldn't articulate, like I had done something wrong by accepting what my father had left me. But over time, I've come to see it differently. The money was never really about the money. It was about being seen. It was about my father looking at the last 2 years of his life and understanding what they had cost me. It was about him saying, in the only language he had left, that my sacrifices mattered, that I mattered, that he wanted me to have a life beyond obligation and duty and the endless, invisible work of holding things together. And I do have that life now. It's quiet. It's mine. It's built on a foundation that feels solid in a way nothing has felt solid in a very long time. Sometimes I wonder if Vanessa thinks about those 2 years, if she ever tallies up the visits she didn't make, the bills she didn't pay, the hours she spent living her life while I put mine on hold. I wonder if she tells herself a different story, one where she was busy and overwhelmed and doing her best, one where I was calculating and manipulative and stole something that should have been hers. I don't know. I don't think it matters. We all tell ourselves stories to make sense of our choices. The difference is that my story is backed by documentation, by testimony, by the careful records of a man who wanted to make sure the truth was undeniable even after he was gone. I keep those records in a safe deposit box along with his letter. I don't look at them often, but I know they're there. I know that if I ever doubt myself, if I ever start to believe Vanessa's version of events, I can pull out those pages and remember what actually happened. I can read my father's words again and hear him telling me that I earned this, that I deserved this, that I should not let anyone make me feel otherwise. I think that's the real inheritance. Not the money, though the money changed my life in practical ways I can't deny. The real inheritance is the permission to stop apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for putting myself first after decades of putting everyone else ahead of me. I think about the version of myself who stood in that hospital waiting room 2.5 years ago, who looked at Vanessa scrolling through her phone and felt that familiar mixture of resentment and resignation. I think about how much that version of me still believed that if she just did enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, eventually everyone would see her value. I don't believe that anymore. I learned the hard way that some people will never see your value because they are not looking, because your value to them lies precisely in your willingness to disappear into the background and make their lives easier. I learned that you cannot earn love or respect or recognition through endless service, that the people who truly see you will see you whether you're sacrificing yourself or not, and that the people who don't will simply expect more until you have nothing left to give. My father saw me. In the end, when it mattered most, he saw me. And he left me not just money, but proof that he saw me, proof that I could hold in my hands when the doubt crept in, when the guilt threatened to overwhelm me, when Vanessa's accusations tried to reshape reality into something I couldn't recognize. I am grateful for that. I am grateful for the letter, for the documentation, for the quiet, methodical way he built a case for my worth. I'm grateful that he understood I would need that the battle wouldn't end with his death, that I would need armor against the people who would try to take what he had given me. And I am grateful that he was right. That the truth, when documented carefully and presented clearly, was enough. That I didn't have to be louder or meaner or more aggressive. I just had to show up, tell the truth, and let the records speak. That's what I've learned, I think. That showing up matters. That truth matters. That you don't have to be perfect or beloved or universally understood. You just have to be consistent. You just have to be there. You just have to do the work even when no one is watching, even when no one seems to care, because eventually someone will notice. Eventually someone will see. And even if they don't, even if you're the only one who knows how much you gave and how much it costs, that knowledge has to be enough. Because the alternative is to keep giving to people who will never see you, keep sacrificing to people who will never appreciate it, keep shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold you. And I'm done with that. I'm done making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I'm done feeling guilty for having boundaries. I have a life now that feels like mine. It's not perfect. It's not without complications. There are still days when I feel sad about Vanessa, when I wonder if there was something I could have said or done differently, some way I could have made her understand. But those days are fewer now. And when they come, I remind myself of the mediator's words: if your client wanted to be recognized for caregiving, she should have participated in caregiving. It's simple. It's true. It's enough. I don't know if Vanessa and I will ever reconcile. Part of me hopes we will, someday, when enough time has passed, when the anger has faded, when we can both look at what happened with some perspective and honesty. But part of me knows that reconciliation might never come, that some rifts are too deep, that some people will never forgive you for refusing to absorb their blame. And I'm okay with that. I have to be okay with that. Because the alternative is to give back what my father left me, to admit that Vanessa was right, to accept that my sacrifices didn't matter and my father was wrong to recognize them. And I can't do that. I won't do that. Not for Vanessa. Not for anyone. This is the life my father wanted me to have. This is the future he tried to give me. And I'm going to live it fully, without guilt, without apology, without looking back at the people who are angry that I stopped carrying them. I'm going to live it for me. And for him. And for the version of myself who spent 2 years shoring up, giving everything, believing that love meant sacrifice and sacrifice meant disappearing. That version of me deserves this life. This peace. This freedom. And I'm finally ready to accept it. If you've ever been the person who showed up, who gave everything, who held it all together while everyone else lived their lives, I want you to know something. You're not selfish for wanting recognition. You're not greedy for accepting what you've earned. You're not wrong for having boundaries. And you're not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Show up for yourself the way you showed up for them. Give yourself the grace you gave everyone else. And if someone tells you that you're selfish for finally putting yourself first, remember that they benefited from you putting yourself last. Their comfort is not your responsibility. Your life is. Thumbnail text main black dad had a stroke. I rearranged my whole life. Sister visited on weekends, brought expensive pastries, made him love. Text highlights. And 2 years later dad died. His attorney called us in text spot and strip yellow bar. She smiled until she saw the updated world titles. 1. I lost everything taking care of dad while my sister lived her life, then as well was read. 2. My sister laughed while I sacrificed everything for dad until she heard what he left me. 3. I paid for dad's care while sister planned her wedding. The will changed everything. Description. I spent 2 years taking care of my father after his stroke. 2 years of rearranged schedules, missed opportunities, drained savings, and a life that shrank down to hospital waiting rooms and medication charts. My sister visited on weekends, brought pastries, made him laugh, and everyone said how wonderful it was that she could lift his spirits. No one mentioned that I was the one keeping him alive. She got engaged. She went on a honeymoon. She bought a house. She lived her life while I put mine on hold, covering her share of the bills she promised to pay, driving to appointments she said she couldn't make, showing up in all the ways that didn't photograph well or make people smile. When he died, I thought I knew what would happen. The will was fair. Everything split evenly. That's what you'd always said. That's what I expected. I was wrong. Turns out my father had been keeping records. Every appointment I drove him to. Every bill I paid. Every hour I spent while my sister was somewhere else. He'd documented all of it carefully, methodically, and he'd made a decision that I didn't know about until it was too late for anyone to argue. My sister didn't take it well. She hired a lawyer. She called me manipulative, calculating, vindictive. She tried to prove our father wasn't in his right mind, that I'd influenced him, that I'd stolen what should have been hers. But my father had thought of that too. He'd left proof. Medical records. Testimony. Bank statements. A letter explaining exactly why he did what he did. He'd built a case for my worth because he knew no one else would. The legal battle lasted a year. Depositions, mediation, lawyers asking questions designed to make me look like a villain. But the truth was simple and it was documented. I showed up. She didn't. He noticed. He acted accordingly. This is a story about what happens when you spend your life being the reliable one, the one who sacrifices, the one who holds everything together while everyone else gets to live. It's about what happens when someone finally notices. And it's about learning that you don't have to apologize for accepting what you've earned. I don't know if my sister and I will ever speak again. I don't know if she'll ever understand that this wasn't about favoritism or cruelty or some calculated plan. It was about a father who saw clearly in his final years what he'd failed to see before. That one daughter had given everything while the other had given what was convenient. If you've ever been that person, the one everyone relies on until they don't need you anymore, I think you'll understand this story. And if you've ever wondered whether anyone noticed all those invisible sacrifices, all those hours no one thanked you for, maybe this will give you an answer. Sometimes people do notice. Sometimes they notice everything. Sometimes they leave you proof.